Lots of questions already coming in. I won't, just one question, Julie, that I won't wait to ask you. Let me ask you just now. Somebody just asked, when will it be available publicly? Because you talked about the pilots, but...
Yes, so basically the prototype that's being developed between us is going to be ready by the end of the year, and we'll be doing the reporting, etc., by the end of the year. And so we envisage being able to use that as part of a service after the project finishes, so from sort of February, March time. So if the question is, when can you basically go into a website and sign up for a membership, the CBA tool? So the route that we're going down currently isn't for us to sort of develop a tool and then put it out there. It's more to work with existing software providers so that they can, they can create, so for example, if there's a BIM authoring software, they can create a module that's about circular building assessment that will work seamlessly with their system. Or maybe it's a software company that specializes in environmental impact assessment. They can produce a sort of CBA module or iteration of that. So we think that's how we're going to get the most impact. So it really depends on how quickly we can go through those discussions with these other software providers and enable them to develop their equivalent. But as a service, it'll be ready, from next year.
Okay, great. Other questions that what's for lunch? Don't know. And somebody did want to know whether the live stream is going to be available. I don't know if, do you know, Caroline? Whether there'll be a recording of the live stream available. Yes, it'll be on the website, so yes, that's... anyway, the other questions we will discuss in our Q&A. So we're now going to move on, thank you very much indeed, Gillian, and we're now moving on to materials passports. Very important, one of the BAMB tools, and Lars Luskere from EPO in a Hamburg-based company, but you're working in Eindhoven, I think. You've been involved in lots of BAMB projects, but you're focusing mainly on materials passports. So, Lars, before you speak, let's do what we've been doing so far. We've got a nice pattern established here. Let's have a look at a Slido question that you suggested. Why are you not reusing products optimally? It's assuming that you're not reusing products optimally. Is it because of lack of data? Is it because of the costs? Is it because of liability? Is it because of time and planning? Or is it availability of materials? So why are you not reusing products in the best way? So we've got almost a tie here. Lack of data, time planning. Lack of data seems to be, that's interesting, lack of data. Not surprising, probably, Lars, do you think, lack of data?
No, I think it's very interesting also that we see quite an even spread. Of course, purposefully, I did not put in all of the above, as that would be the right answer.
I guess it depends who you are, because if you're an architect, you'll have one view. If you're a building owner, you'll have another view.
Yeah, exactly. Depends on the type of stakeholder that you are. Depends on the type of materials, the type of products that you're thinking about. But I think this is very interesting. It's interesting to see this quite even spread. But yeah, definitely lack of data is big reason why we started to work on materials passports. They're really aimed to tackle this problem. And we're also tapping into the other issues that you see on screen.
Okay, let's have a look at the second Slido. Do you have experience with any of these? Do you actually have experience? You may have heard of them, but do you have any experience with them? BAMB materials passports, circularity passports, Circularize, Madasta, multiple of these. Is there a multiple of these? No, none of these. Or other. So most people have not had any experience with any of these, but 26% have 29% BAMB materials passports. So,
yeah. Okay, so that's very interesting. Means that there's a good opportunity today for us to share more about what we're doing. There's an interesting opportunity to join us and to get that experience. There were some more options. Oh yeah, you also see the other on here. So later on in the presentation, you also get an opportunity to share some more insight in this through Slido. So I'm very interested for the ones who have answered others as well, as which ones you are thinking about. But so there's an opportunity to give that input as well, and you're very much invited to join us and get that experience.
Right. Tell us more about materials passports and giving the materials the okay to travel with their passports, travel into the future.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Lars Skuren. As mentioned, I'll talk you through our work with materials passports. I'm working at BAMB. As mentioned, this is a company based in Hamburg. I'm working at the Dutch office. The company was founded by Michael Braungart, one of the developers of Cradle to Cradle, together with William McDonough. And our managing director from Eindhoven is also in the room here, Hein van Tel. And as EPEA, we are involved in a lot of aspects of the BAMB project, but we're really focusing on this materials passport aspect. And also we are responsible for one of the pilot projects within BAMB, the REMs, or the Reversible Experience modules. This was here actually right outside here in January of this year. And it will move, it's a traveling exhibition. It will move to Eindhoven, to the Dutch Design Week from the 20th through the 28th of October of this year. And after that, it will move to Kamp C in Westerlo. So what does the title of this presentation actually mean? So digitization, digitalization, digital transformation. And I don't want to bother you with a long semantic discussion about this, but just maybe in 1 minute give you some clue as to what this even means, why this relates to the BAMB project, and why it's interesting if we're thinking about where we want to go moving forward in construction. So digitization, the first one, that's actually quite simple, quite easy. It's about making analog data digital. So it's like typing over your handwritten lecture notes, or something that I did is putting old VHS cassettes onto a laptop. And then digitalization, this is all about how our lives are more and more shaped around digital technology. So we're leading more digitalized lives than we were 20 years ago. So when I want to watch a video nowadays, I don't put a cassette into a player, but instead I take my mobile phone and I connect with my NAS drive and then stream the video directly to my television screen. And when you're applying this to business, it means how we're using this digitized data to better, more effectively, more efficiently achieve the business goals that we have, like how we can use BIM to design buildings. And then digital transformation, the kicker. This is all about how we aim to transform businesses and their strategies and set whole new objectives which are supported by this digitalization. And there is an example. Of course, you have Netflix, who is using this digitalization of the entertainment industry to offer these new services that were basically unthinkable just a generation ago. So how will BAMB influence this digital transformation? And also how will the digitalization that this emerging materials passport ecosystem brings, how will that support new ideas? Talking about materials passport ecosystem, this is what I mean. You saw some of these in the introduction slide. You might know some of these. You might know of some that we haven't even heard about yet. But there is a growing amount of organizations that are working with materials passports, with building passports, product passports, etc., etc. And there's variety. So there's a variety in the focus that they have, in the services that are offered through these, in the functions that are available on them. And actually the CBA also, about which you heard Jerry speak, also kind of fits into the story. I strongly believe that this variety and this interest in passport should be embraced. It really shows that we're working on something that's necessary, that's needed. So there's a demand, and there won't be just one answer that suits everybody. And this demand can also be we can also see this demand by, on the one hand, in the Transitie Agenda, Circulaire Economie from the Netherlands, in which the government states that they want to be actively working with passports, and actually by 2020 they want to reach a decision on whether or not passports should be mandatory in certain cases. And we also see the need for harmonization and standardization of passports reflected on the European level by the EEB, who have set this as a priority note, and on the Dutch level by this platform CB23, a recent initiative led by, amongst others, the NEN, the Dutch Standardization Institute. And in all this, we see really as a key driver for progress, we see the building owner as a very important stakeholder. They are the ones that are often pushing for change. They are also ones that really have the power to push requirements through the value network. And we can also see this reflected in these emerging initiatives. And the thing that I want to give as a takeaway today is that in order to do this properly, in order to get these building level insights that building owners are looking for, to get these and to do this properly, we really need to work with detailed data on the product level to get there. So in order to achieve these insights on the building level, this needs to be built up from this more fundamental detailed product level in order to achieve insights that can actually help us move towards a circular economy. One of the frequent questions, which was bound to come up also, is how all this will interact with BIM. And we very much believe that instead of competing with BIM, we want to add to it. We believe that working with passports will make it actually more worthwhile and more interesting to keep working with BIM, not only as is done often until the end of the design phase, but also through the use of the building, through transformation, and through eventual decommissioning. Because passports will offer this additional insight, additional information about the products that will give you this more complete, more interesting digital picture of the whole building. So why again is this detailed level of product data so important? Obviously, buildings are made up from the products that they consist of, and then these products have components, these components have ingredients, and then down and down and down until you get to the chemistry involved. And it turns out that in many cases, the things that have the biggest impact on the reusability and on the material health and impact that it has on people and on the environment are really in the smallest volumes that you can find. So you need to have a good look at the products that you're using in your buildings. So just as something that really scared me the first time I heard it, did you know that there are over 143 million inorganic and organic substances known currently? So just imagine how much we don't know about all of these. And one of the things that we also see that's really facilitated by having this better view of the products that we're working with, one of the emerging services that we see in this materials passport ecosystem are these marketplaces. So things that try to tap in, on the one hand, in this wealth of reusable products, and on the other hand, this information about these products that gives you some insight in how those might be reapplied. And this is something that can be connected to public procurement. So you can request materials passports for these products or specific types of information about these products, so that you know how these can be reapplied when you're done using them in one building. And then as promised, and before I leave you, there is this slide where I want to ask you, and maybe not only for this presentation, but also for the presentations up to this point this morning. So which organizations or which technologies were you expecting or are you expecting to hear about today? Are there any new development that you think that we should be looking into? Do you think we're missing anything? So please let us know that. And then I want to thank you very much for your input and also for your attention for this presentation.
Thank you very much. So you're going to collect in all the details and
Yeah. So
have a look.
we just let this run for a second so that we can collect a lot of input, and then we're going to dive into that when we see the results.
Okay. So you're going to wait for some results now? Or are we just going to take some questions? Augmented reality, how to use tools you develop.
I like the augmented reality and the VR. These are, of course, so these are things that we're very much looking into. So how will this also move forward into the future? And we see all these new technologies that can really add even more insights in materials passports and connect them to BIM as well. So think about additional functions that you have with augmented reality, with VR, with functions through Internet of Things, with blockchain, with sensor data on the building level and on the product level. So all these additional insights that are actually also drivers to keep on using BIM throughout the use phase and afterwards of a building.
Thank you very much indeed. Just one of the issues that came up here. Do you want to take a seat, Lars, and then we'll take some of the questions that have come in. Something that was mentioned also just in that slide there, but it's about business models. People asking, who owns what, who pays for what in the beginning. I've just lost the questions now, they've gone off my screen. But in general terms, I don't know if any one of you could talk about that. Gilly, because we have the potential now of sort of who pays for the elements of a building in the beginning. Who owns what? Do people lease parts of buildings? What could happen?
So there are examples of leasing in the built environment, but they're quite few and far between. So the ones that come to mind are the sort of lighting as a service, which is like the one that's trotted out normally when you talk about products as a service. So you pay for the access to the light rather than all the different elements that make up the light and the electricity to power the light. And flooring, so there's some leasing carpet systems as well. But I suppose, they seem to be targeting some of the sort of shorter-lived aspects of a built environment. And you can see that actually in that situation, you can at least have sufficient confidence to understand, right, okay, well, we know how much it costs to the traditional route. You put the system in, you buy the products to go into the system. If it's energy using, you pay for the energy. There's maintenance and there's taking out, disposing, etc. If that's over a 10-year period, you've got a reasonable 15-year period. I think you can have confidence in the data that you can then set your alternative business model against. So your leasing alternative. Though it's quite difficult to get that level of detail to say, well, how have you actually come up with your business model? I think when you go into the longer-lived business models, that's probably going to be the area. So there's not many examples of that. There are some examples of where the sort of mining rights almost are being bought up of lots of buildings and lots of assets, and you can see how that could work as a method of having this flow of products and materials over the next 40, 50 years. So that's like an urban mining business model, really.
But Jan, maybe you could answer this one. Somebody asked, how is the value of collected building materials determined and by whom? And how is functionality of multi-purpose materials decided?
Well, it could be a little complex to decide the value from you could, of course, you have the initial value, of course, when you actually buy something to put into. And that was sort of the one I referred to in the beginning of my presentation, that you buy something and then you install it and it actually tends to lose its value at that point, more or less. Then, of course, we really wanted to keep the value, but there isn't any specific formula for calculating this. And I think it really relates to two main sections. One thing is that a product that is usually developed a lot, that type of product, like, well, lighting fixtures here, there is a constant product development in that. And that will probably reflect back to its value later on, since there might be more efficient systems developed now. So if they can be upgraded, they might have a higher value. If they can't, they will definitely have a lower value since people won't use them. On the other hand, things like things holding the building together over here, they're not developed at the same tempo really, so they might have a longer value that way. But in reality, the value is decided by the market, I would say. If there is someone wanting to buying it and have confidence into it, then it will have a higher value. So there will be estimations, but in reality, you don't know until someone actually is willing to offer you some money for these things.
Somebody says that many of the tools BAMB is discussing, they're for new buildings. What tool have you enabled for supporting urban mining developments of existing building stock? I don't know who wants. I mean, certainly, Julie, you mentioned a lot more about it being more relevant for your newer buildings.
Yeah, well, that's why I showed these three sort of life cycles. So what can you do with the existing built environment? What can you do currently for transformation, adaptability? And then what can you sort of create as a bank for the future, so future reuse potential? So we have covered all three of those in terms of the BAMB project. But I think what's really important to understand is that we are looking at this sort of quite multifaceted approach, and I think what Jan was saying is like how much the value associated with how much is somebody prepared to pay for it, but actually with the existing built environment, what's coming out of the existing built environment, the same is true. You know, we can only reuse bits of the existing built environment if there's something for them to go into and there's a value associated with that. So we're focusing on that in terms of what the drivers for reusing from the existing built environment, and then how do you sort of capture, how do you assess that value from an environmental assessment, social perspective?
So Lars, in terms of passports need to be kept up to date. I mean, is that an issue in itself? And well, I mean, and standardization obviously is an issue. So how do you deal with those?
Yep. So I think those are two separate questions. So passports need to be kept up to date, and I think this also relates to one of the questions that I saw coming in on Slido, which is all about like who owns the data that's sitting on a platform like that, and I think this really connects to how materials passport platforms will be collecting their data, because ideally I think this stays as close as possible to the origin of the data, so that's much easier to update it. So if you're talking about the detailed product data that is coming in from the manufacturer and its suppliers, then ideally with your platform you're tapping into these data sources so that you're getting up-to-date product information all the time to show up on your platform. And that's a way to handle that, and you're keeping the ownership of the data at the source, ideally. Harmonization, standardization, as I mentioned in my presentations, are obviously very important. So this is something that we want to work with. This is something that we really identify of course, currently as a challenge, because we see all these emerging initiatives, and we see that there's a strong need for standardization, but there's also this opportunity, because many of these are still relatively new. There's still there's a big opportunity in collaborating between each other to make sure that we're all able to work with data coming in from manufacturers, from suppliers, and to be much more interoperable between each other, so that we're all able to provide our services, provide our insights that are specific for certain types of stakeholders that we choose to focus on.
And there are a couple of questions sort of linked here. One says that the questions that we're addressing here give answers from people more or less convinced of the need to increase circularity, but reality is different. In other words, we're all sort of converted here. And another one says that BAMB can work if there is demand from consumers. Have you developed a communication dimension to motivate end users interested in the environment or not to take part in BAMB? So it's sort of, getting the word out to a sort of a larger audience. I don't know who's got a thought on that.
Well, of course, an important thing within BAMB is to communicate, and we have special sections actually just to try to get the message out. Well, this is one thing related to it. But of course, also you have to consider who would be the target. And I think that the main thing we actually have to communicate to, sure, a general audience would be nice, but what we also will have to communicate and try to convince are mostly, I would say, the people sitting on the money. Really, the people that are going to require these buildings to be built and are going to own them. If they don't see an advantage in this, I think it will be really hard to force it. So we need to show to the, well, investors or real estate owners, so on, to show that this can actually be an economically viable alternative. Both, of course, from the arguments that you're actually doing this good for the future, but also that you can see a net return somewhere. And that is a challenge, absolutely. So we're doing a lot to try to communicate this, but we could, of course, do any more.
I'll just add a little point. I mean, I actually think the power of data and digitalization could be really important here. Where, you know, maybe you'll get a next generation of apps that are created to enable, you know, more of the domestic market. In the UK, most reclaimed products and materials are being used by the domestic market. So people doing an extension or their own self-build. So there's already a demand there. And if we can make that even easier and more accessible and more exciting and innovative, I think we can get much more of the domestic sector actually acting as drivers to create the market. And actually, it's not then a massive step for more of the commercial development to think, well, people actually quite like this old stuff in buildings. You know, maybe we should incorporate it and that'll add value to our developments. And I think that's some of the message that we need to push forward, but also we need to enable the data that we're collecting, the digitization, standardization that we're doing, to actually open up access to other people to create more domestic targeted apps and services, etc.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for now. All three of you are going to stay there, I know, because we will have another Q&A session after the next two presenters. So thank you very much indeed, and thanks for the questions. We haven't got them all covered, I know, but we will come back to some of them. So we're now going to hear some lessons from the field, because we heard Molly talking about the pilot projects earlier on. So we now want to just find out really just how they have actually developed and how they have demonstrated the potential and shown that actually, you know, all this can really happen. So we are joined by Theo Capel, who is from Brussels Environment. She's an architect and urban planner. And you're basically in charge of the pilot projects. You go around the sites and have a look at them and write reports and things like that. So obviously the perfect person to talk about this. So let us have a look at our Slido question. Here we go.
Hello,
so
everybody.
Can you rate your experience related to data sharing in construction? So this is data sharing in general, because obviously a lot of us are having to deal with data. Can you rate your experience related to data sharing in construction? Well, already 53% are saying not satisfactory, 29%, 15%. So not satisfactory.
Okay. So this is a very interesting...
Put the microphone very close.
Yes, like this. I will ask if it's possible afterwards to present.
You can present, yeah.
It's good. So yeah, it is very interesting because as we see construction industry...
Can you put the microphone really close?
Okay, here we go. So the construction industry is late in the digital transformation, and I think we see that still there are a lot of professionals, because I saw that there are a lot of architects here, that they are not yet, like in other sectors, really diving in the digitalization. And I think, well, this is a very interesting thing, because we can learn from what happened in other sectors and maybe see how we can drive the digitalization where we want and not be driven by it.
Let's look at the next question then. So have you ever asked what lessons can be learned from other fields, banks, retail, music, e-commerce, and applied to construction? Does it ever, do you think it's important? Yes, 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 no doubt about that.
Thanks. We can,
and have you already interacted with digitalized work sites? Just rudimentary tools,
yeah.
exchange platform of data, or BIM models.
Okay, so this is already a good start.
Okay, well, that will lead you in to tell us more about the pilot
Yes.
projects. Thank you very much, Theo.
Is it possible to maybe to film the slides, because maybe people will be more interesting to see the pilots' pictures than rather than me. Okay, so it will be a marathon through all our pilot projects. Just a moment, okay. And in fact, what I will do today, I will present all the 4 presentations, but I will add all the pictures that coming from the pilot project, so you can understand how we work. What happens? There is a problem with the... Okay, so I need to use the clicker. Okay, so as you already saw, during the last 3 years, the work of our team has been driven by one important goal. And I think this is what we have always in mind. We are looking to preserve yours, and the next generation natural resources. And together with our 15 partners, we strive to find, in the end, practical and viable solution, easy to be used by the professional and by everybody in an industry which is creating, as you know, and already, the most of the global waste production, so the construction sector. You already saw this morning that we are articulating our... Oh, what happens? It's going a little bit too fast. Okay, so we are articulating our vision around these 5 pillars: the material passports, the building, reversible building design, the business models as a conclusion, and policies and standards. And we are developing and aim to develop this circular building assessment. But to do this, we are using... Why it's going so... Oh, okay. There is an issue with the presentation. I don't know why.
Could be this one is disturbing.
Okay, good. So we are using 6 pilots projects. And these pilots projects allows us to anchor the results in the reality and to bring together the industry players, the field expertise, and also the multidisciplinary BAMB team. And thanks to the pilots project, we can test, improve all the concepts that my colleagues are trying to develop. Nonetheless, we are studying this. Well, I think I will have to go a little bit like this because it goes. Okay, so we are studying these pilots through different phases and stages of design. So through the design process, the build, the operation. Well, I'm a little bit sorry, it doesn't. Okay. Is it fine? You can hear me? Okay. So we are providing information about the pilots over different stages of the building life cycle. So we are working on the design, on the build process, on the operation. We are introducing maintenance and redesign into our study. So what is also very important, we are also introducing this reflexive monitoring. So we are studying the external opportunities and also the external barriers. We are looking also at the societal changes and also about the user perspective. So when we are talking about business model, I would like to make the link now to say that while this is one of the important things, and by the pilots, we are looking also in this framework. So the BAMB project has different location. We have 2 pilots projects in Brussels. So we have the BRIC project, which is a wooden module that will be constructed and disassembled 3 times by trainees in Brussels. You can see it up. We have the VUB Circular Retrofit Lab, which will be a circular refurbishment of a student housing situated in the university campus of VUB. We have the Reversible Experience REMs, which is an exhibition module that already Lars explained you. We have GTB Lab, we'll have more information about it after presented by my colleague, Alma. And we have the new office architecture, the transformable building in Essen, Germany, which is a building that is already built, a very big scale building. And we have the Green Design Center transformable building in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We can see that our pilot projects are really a laboratory for circularity. So we reshape the design approach. We are looking at a different scale of the design, so creating flexible buildings, also adapting systems, and nonetheless, we are looking at the value of the materials that are used. We are also integrate the reuse potential of the materials, and in the case of the brick project situated in Brussels, we want to prove that the economic value of materials can be preserved throughout several transformations. We managed to look deep in the change in the project governance. For instance, our project also situated in Brussels, the Circular Retrofit Lab. We saw that we could achieve circularity by engaging contractors, manufacturers, designers, and researchers upstream in a design collaborative process. Well, this is our traveling exhibition, REMs. We are working on the combination between the physical and digital system in order to maximize the synergies between the data interface and the reuse potential. And with the GTB lab, which will be also, as I said, presented by Alma, we are gathering information in order to develop our circular building assessment tool. Well, nonetheless, the project that is already finished in Essen gave us a lot of feedbacks on the procurement. Okay, I will explain very, very fast the three lessons learned from our project. So we have the REM, which help us to see how the information can be shared across the process and time. The fact that this module is traveling all over the Europe, it's an extraordinary opportunity to see all the stakeholders together and to get feedback from them. So it's an opportunity to see, for instance, what type of information is necessary for which type of stakeholders. In the case of the brick, which you can see, this is the constructed module, and this is the project for the brick 2. So the next project will be the transformation of brick 1 in brick 2. We had a lot of things to learn. Is that normally in a traditional configuration of stakeholders, we do not have the suppliers for reuse materials. But when we get to a circular scheme, we see that these suppliers are entering in the game. And we see also that we have to extend our activities over the facility, utility, and maintenance. Therefore, we need this kind of link between all these activities, and this is done with the help of digitalization and with the help of the material passports. Our project in Brussels, the Circular Retrofit Lab, CRL, it's a very interesting project. It's very complex. You'll hear a lot of news about it in the future months. But what I would like to highlight here is the relation with the CBA and the fact that, as Gilly explained, it's a very complex, the CBA methodology, it's a very complex methodology, but in the CRL laboratory, we managed to use the BAMB model, and this will be practically used not only for scientific part, but also for the practical. So it's the contractor who will use it, of course the architects, the contractors, but also the aim is to integrate it into the operational and the maintenance process. Okay, nonetheless, our project situated in Germany, in Essen, proved us that there is it's a big scale project. So we have a lot of relation and contractual relation between people that are not directly involved in the construction of the project, like the owner, which has to pass through a developer. So what the project, because they really wanted to integrate the BAMB concept, and what happens is that they created a contractual and the procurement procedure that could transform and translate this vision from the owner until the contractor and the construction of the building by integrating clear objectives, by being very careful that every time the detail that is in a contractual step corresponds to the level of the activities involved. So will be other information from contractors, of course, than from the developers. And nonetheless, they made relation between the material passports and how to integrate the reversibility of the building by integrating in the material passports the idea that manufacturer has to be involved from the first design step of the process. Well, just I'm going to finish as my colleagues were saying, circularity in the construction project is feasible. And we have to, I think that this was the beginning of the presentation, if we have always the vision about where and what we want to achieve, I think digitalization is facilitating. Data sharing, it's also facilitating, and as my colleagues were already pointing, this is something that has to be still worked out, but also clear specification and procurement. It's very important to clarify the roles, objectives of each contractors, and also to allow this integration of all the stakeholders from the first phases of the design process and construction process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teo. Do you want to sit with us here and we'll take any questions for you later on. So we're now going to move on to talking about reversible building design and how it can be a tool for the future of sustainable procurement. Really, really important. And Elma Dermisevic is an architect and research leader at the University of Twente and 4D Architects. She's leading the development of reversible building design tools for BAMB. So, Elma, let's have a look at the first Slido question that you have suggested. So what's the main challenge when implementing reversible building designs? Now, we actually want you to give us an answer here.
Hard. Yes, you have to think.
It's not just multiple choice. What do you think is the main challenge when you're implementing reversible building designs?
Or where you want to realize reversible buildings or circular buildings, what you come across as the big challenge.
Not sure what to do, how to do it. Connection within different products, unclear what it means. Financial consequences. So basically, knowledge, lack of knowledge seems to be the overarching thing. Where do we start? Yeah.
Looking in the future, I saw as well a comment. Indeed, it's very difficult to predict the future, and that's one of the reasons why we do have lots of demolition and construction demolition waste, because we cannot predict the future. And as designers, we think, and architects, we thought in conventional design schools of architecture that we can design also the way that people will be living in future generations. But obviously, that is not the case, and one of the reasons why we are facing huge environmental impacts of transformations of the built environment. And yeah, of course, how to do it, the standardization of the design principles and the indicators, where are we going to look at, what is the ambition we want to achieve, and how can we standardize the meaning of what circular building and circular design is.
Let's have a look at the next question. Interesting, somebody said designers have to change their attitude. What is the key opportunity of reversible building designs? I mean, what can it actually achieve? What do you think is, why would you even bother to do it? What is the key opportunity?
Looks like a hard question.
Commercial IP, retaining value, adding customer value, sharing wealth. make the world a better place, creating new markets, diversity, beauty.
Yeah, basically it's all right. It's all tackling the right issues and questions, and an overarching thing is that by designing reversible buildings, we are actually creating circular buildings where the adaptability and transformation of buildings are possible without demolition, and where the circularity of material is enabled through such design.
Okay, so there's some very nice answers. I mean, we'll be able to put I think these on a website to have a look at, because it's good to see what people are saying. Combined ecology and economics. So let's have a look at the third Slido question. And this is, what would you prioritize when thinking of the circular economy? And this is just assessment of reuse potential of building products, assessment of transformation capacity of a building, or design protocol to guide design towards circular building design. So what are you looking at first? Design protocol, assessing the reuse, or assessing the transformation capacity of a building?
Yeah, I think it is in line with the first the conclusions, like knowledge, how to design, how to guide the designers to design circular buildings. Yeah, to start with, the good design protocols and guidelines would help us to move further. But the other ones are as important, because once we design something, of course, we would like to know how, what is the performance of our design solutions. So that's why we need assessment tools to enable us to understand the performance of our design solutions. And that's what we are trying to achieve through the reversible building design tools and protocols within BAMB project.
So Elma, you tell us more then about what BAMB is doing in the world of reversible design.
Okay, so obviously I will be talking about reversible building design and in relation to the procurement, because one thing is to design and to know how to design, and maybe just to start with saying that reversible building design is basically about paradigm shift. It is about changing our perception of the buildings and built environment from perceiving them as static structures and buildings and into the perception of dynamic, reconfigurable, upgradable structures, which are adaptable, whose materials components can be exchanged, reused, reconfigured. That's where we want to go. So that's reversible building, and that's the aim of reversible building design tools and protocols, which is being developed within BAMB. So reversible building design tools, they basically assess design solutions, but they also assess existing buildings. So they help us to understand the performance of existing buildings when we talk about reuse potential and transformation capacity of buildings or building solutions. And the buildings and products which have high reuse potential and have high transformation capacity we label as reversible buildings. Just to give an idea what reversible building tools are doing. So obviously to, let's see, okay. To give you some information on how the tools are built on, what are the aspects that the tools have built on. Of course, we have to understand the key 3 dimensions of reversible buildings in order to understand their performance. And these dimensions have to do with spatial dimension, technical dimension, and of reversibility, and material dimension of reversibility. So if space capacity allows us to adopt buildings without demolishing them and creating waste, then we have spatial reversibility to talk about. Technical reversibility will allow us to reconfigure and disassemble parts of the structures, and that will enable the reuse of components in new situations, or to separate materials. So those are the key dimensions, literally, of each building where we are looking at. And that feeds into the way how the tools of reversible building design are organized and clustered. So the reversible building design tools refer to technical reversibility, where the space separation of materials and reconfiguration are important elements of this ease of dismantling and reuse. And it addresses another dimension, very important one, on spatial reversibility, what the building has as a capacity on the building level, on the spatial level of a building. Putting them all together, we have made a kind of toolkit which is needed and which can help designers, first of all, to design reversible circular buildings, but as I said, also to reflect on the designs and to assess the performance of design solutions. So we have reuse potential tool, which is reflecting on product level reversibility. Transformation capacity tool, which is looking at building level transferability, reversibility. Virtual simulator tool is a software which is basically helping designers to make decisions in the early design phase. It's a digital tool with which we want to help and provide more digitalization in the early design phase as well, and design support. And reversible building design protocol helps designers to design circular buildings through all design phases. And to go further in understanding how we do that and how we came up to the indicators of reversible buildings, for which we hope that will play an important role in future procurement of buildings and definition of project briefs for future buildings. We'll need to look at the nature of the building, and at its core, reversible buildings have two key pillars in that respect, adaptability and reuse. And disassembly is seen as a key performance indicator of reversible building. And these three together form the basic triangle, which create our basic framework to understand three dimensions of reversibility, which is spatial, structural, and material dimension, which I mentioned. And this framework helps us to categorize all buildings and design solutions into three categories: irreversible, partly reversible, and reversible structures. And we are putting the numbers on that to help us assess environmental and economic impacts later on. So being able to add this into procurement, into design brief, will definitely speed up our transition towards circular buildings in the future. This looks quite complex, and there are many more complex diagrams which I will spare you of. But just to give you an idea of the number of indicators that we are dealing with and assessing in order to be able to understand the technical reversibility and reuse potential tool. An indicator is actually telling us and indicates what the technical reversibility of building and the structure is. And this reuse potential is assessed by understanding three key dependencies which exist in each product structure. And those are functional, technical, and physical dependencies. And you see here a number of indicators of these dependencies. And the way the design deals with these indicators through design process will actually inform us on what the reuse potential of the structure and elements in a structure is, as well as what the reuse options of designed artifacts would be. So that is our aim also through this project, to not only come to the number and indication of reuse potential of elements in the buildings, but also to relate them to possible reuse options. And that is being done manually at this point by using Excel sheets, which are becoming bigger and bigger. And as the work progresses further, we are also investigating the full implementation, integration of all these reversible building design technical aspects into BIM, into digital world, which at this stage enables us to automate the calculations of dependencies, physical dependencies of elements within a building, including their reversibility of their connections. So it's a huge step for us to speed up the assessment process, and this kind of digitalization, further digitalization of assessment tools will definitely help us also in the procurement stages to be more precise, to put the requirements in a brief more correctly, and to define it in a more precise manner, to know what are we asking from the design teams. So when analyzing and putting all these indicators together on the technical reversibility, we have managed to characterize all structures into 3 groups. As I mentioned, irreversible, partly reversible, and reversible. And each of these groups is linked to a number of cluster of end-of-life options. And there are 3 types of end-of-life options that we can attach to this reuse potential indicators. And they, of course, are at the same time indicators of environmental and economic impacts, which are then integrated into circular building assessment tool. And looking at the other dimension, the spatial dimension, it gives us another view of reversibility of buildings. And it is actually looking at the spatial capacity and what the space can do. It addresses also the initial design phase and helps designers to basically understand how to design buildings for multiple use scenarios. But it also addresses some technical issues and components which need to support changes in the future, spatial changes, without causing demolition and without creating a waste. So that's put into a tool which is called Transformation Capacity Tool. And the Transformation Capacity Tool, basically, if put into design brief, would definitely enable the procurement party to say more about the future performance of a building, and also to make a shift from design of buildings for one end-of-life performance to a design of building for multiple end-of-life options, which will have multiple value propositions in the future. And to finish with another confusing slide, but just to give an idea, in the end, is the way that these reversible building design aspects are being addressed during the design process will indicate what the transformation and reuse options of buildings and the products really are. And that will inform in a great deal also the environmental and economic performance, future performance of the building, and risk management that you can deal with on a long run. So definitely integration of these baseline indicators of reversible buildings into the design brief during the procurement stage will make a great boost towards circular procurement and circular economy in construction in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Elma. If you'd like to come and join us here. I've been looking through questions, so they're all coming in different orders. But a couple of questions here. Somebody says, it's difficult to get information from suppliers. Should we have a digital bank of materials that have already been assessed? And somebody else says, is there a role for construction product manufacturers? What would you say, Lars?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And there is, I guess there's various types of answers to it, really depending on the level that you're looking at. My colleague from BAMB here at Sundus, Jan Bostrom, is of course working on having this, this bank, this library of products which have certain data available and assessments on them. I myself, working from EPEA, we're working on credit creator certification, so we're working on with manufacturers to optimize their products for health and for reusability. So you have...
It means a much greater transparency, doesn't it, on the part of manufacturers? And does
yes.
that create a problem?
It depends, because there are two ways in which you can do this. So you can either demand full transparency, which definitely will be a problem. This is a problem in some sectors more than others, but in some cases, the manufacturers and their suppliers and their sub-suppliers, they want to keep their knowledge. This is what, this is the trade secret. And this is problematic in getting that all transparent. So I don't think pushing for full transparency will really get us there. But what we can do is analyze the data, have third parties assess this, and communicate with materials passports on the results of those assessments, which can be open and can be communicated. So I do see that there is a move towards transparency. I think that's already happening. I think that will go further. But I think just pushing blindly for full transparency will not, I don't think that will work.
There's a couple of questions here about the low cost of raw materials, basically saying that it doesn't give any incentive to recycle. Should we be driving up the cost of virgin materials? I don't know who wants to. Jan?
Well, yes, there currently isn't that expensive to get new materials. Of course, we will have to have a little longer perspective there, but there are also other aspects on it. So a simple thing, if you say, you consider, if you have the name of this project, Buildings as Material Banks, then you will say, okay, well, we have a number of tons of steel and so on. And that would be sort of one way of looking at it. But I'm not sure that was going to be the first driver actually to start to reuse. Well, for some specific materials, you can see something for copper and things like that. But the main purpose for reusing it is actually not just the material value, it's the value of the components, really. Since, of course, incorrect way of using, well, these structures here, the material value is much lower than the value of the complete product, really. And I think that's really what we are after, since that will be much easier to prove also. Since as long as the material value isn't that high, yeah, we can't really argue that it's just the cost of iron that's going to drive this.
But, do you want to come in now? Yeah. Another issue that somebody says is how do you ensure the compliance of reused materials? But anyway, carry on with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that through GTB Lab project, just to mention that now, and some other pilot projects, we do collaborate with the industry and producers of building systems and components who are now very much involved in developing their ecosystem and take-back systems and see that as the driving force for circularity of their products in the future. And of course, we are aware through discussion with these companies that they go themselves through lots of barriers within the boards and so forth. It's not easy. This transition is really not easy, and everyone is struggling to find a way. But we did come across a couple of these pioneers in construction industry, especially in the system producers level, which are taking very serious steps towards reuse and reconfiguration.
So what about this one? Yes, how do we ensure the compliance of reused materials? I'm looking, not knowing who. Jilly, do you want to start that? Yeah.
I've done a bit of work on this, so yeah. I mean, it's an issue in terms of. We had this discussion yesterday. Actually, we're talking about the cost of reclaim versus new equivalents, and how do you sort of like, actually taking on board the previous question, how do you sort of make the business case towards using reclaimed? And actually some of those costs are, so for example, with reused steel, there's been a really good studies carried out that actually pins down the exact costs of retesting, recertification, like repurposing. And actually the addition of all those costs, which is effectively to create the confidence to reuse these particular components, means that the, I suppose, the profit margin is being eroded. But obviously, you're not going to want to trade off that. You're not going to increase risk just so that you can increase profit. So this is where things like having better data on material passports, on how the building's been put together, on how the building's been managed, etc., over its life cycle. We're confident that actually they can enable the further reuse of products, materials, buildings to be done at a much lower, much easier, and actually without necessarily having these additional testing, recertification costs. Because actually in the UK, the focus is on making sure that things are fit for purpose. And if you've got the information available to you so that you're confident as an engineer or whoever it is that's making that decision as to whether or not something's fit for purpose, if you can do that without having to send something off to a testing lab, then actually that then makes it a much more compelling business case for certain reclaimed items, reused items.
Let's just finish off with this question, because I really like this question. Reversible design would conduct, it's basically modular, cubic structures. Architects and real estate developers, they like unique projects and curves. Are they ready to play the game? The whole design thing, it's key, isn't it?
Yes, it is a key, and this is a question which comes very often when I talk about reversible buildings and design, because I know that perception from architects and designers who think now this is standardization, we don't like that, and our creativity is not going to flourish and so forth. And my answer always is basically you should see reversible buildings in the future as and the task of the designers should be to design transformable monuments. And I do have some examples of that, and living myself in Amsterdam, there are many buildings in Amsterdam which are really reversible monuments. And it is a huge task for the designers. That means they have to be really equipped of designing high quality buildings which are part of the context of the societies and the cultural continuity.
So when you say reversible monuments, you mean that the exterior can remain the same forever and the interior can be changed and modularized?
Yes, but also parts of the exterior can be exchanged. It's part of the design game, which is then the task of the designer to define the level between variable and fixed parts. Which ones are the ones which are defining the identity of the structure and architecture that everyone is proud of, and which parts of the building belong to the time and change, and help people to always adapt and upgrade their buildings to their standards. And there are a couple of examples, also historical examples, which show that it is possible, but it really asks a high quality design, and a lot of architects and new students of architecture, which we are working on and trying to bring this awareness on the design tables. So it is not standard, it is not at all standard, it opens lots of creativity and possibilities to creating variations, but you have to really work harder.
Well, I think it's fascinating. If we had more, I don't know if there is an architect in here that wants to come back on that at all. Have a view? No. Well, listen, at this point, I'm going to thank our speakers because it is time to break for lunch, and we're going to this afternoon be exploring beyond Europe and looking to the One Planet Network. But thank you all very much indeed for all your input. And thank you for all the questions. It's great because it really does sort of keep the conversation going. So lunch is served out here, and we'll be back here in an hour's time. So thank you.